If you ask yourself what do the names mean, you see that the names meant the same, except this was in ancient Egyptian, this was in Sumerian, or later Babylonian, Akkadian. And then he said there was a period, according to Manetho, of almost 3,600 years of demigods, which meant offspring of the Anunnaki, like the sons of gods. And the Bible says married the daughters of men and had children by them, and these would be called demigods.
Incredible as it may sound, a document exists that describes the first war in which the gods involved mortal men. It is an inscription on the walls of the great temple at Edfu, an ancient Egyptian holy city that was dedicated to the god Horus. The inscription, remarkable for its geographical accuracy, begins with an exact date, a date not in the affairs of men, but of the gods. It deals with events when the gods themselves, long before the pharaohs, reigned over Egypt. Quote, "In the year 363, His Majesty Ra, the Holy One, the Falcon of the Horizon, the Immortal who forever lives, was in the land of Kin, also known as Nubia. He was accompanied by his warriors, for the enemies had conspired against their lord in the district which had been called Ua since that day." End quote. Prior to the creation of dynasties in the prehistory of ancient Egypt, god-kings reigned. These beings were undoubtedly the same Anunnaki of the ancient Sumerian text, but with different names. For example, Ptah of Egypt is the Sumerian Enki, Isis the same as Inanna, and Ra the same as Marduk. But Egypt was distinct from Sumer, even if the players were essentially the same. In Egypt, Ptah/Enki held sway, while in Sumer it was his half-brother Enlil. This is a major difference, and accounts for massive differences in their histories, cultures, and those traditions brought down to us today. The Sinai Peninsula was essentially the neutral zone between the opposing forces of Enki and Enlil. Unfortunately, for the humans in the zone, especially those living in Sodom and Gomorrah, for example, neutrality turned out to be a serious illusion when nuclear weapons became involved. Circa 18,420 BCE, Ptah became the first king of Egypt and was known as the creator god, a very great god who came forth in the earliest times. He undertook great works of land reclamation and diking, thus explaining Egypt's nickname, the raised land. Ptah/Enki was a god of heaven and earth, and considered to be a great engineer. His base of operations, according to legend, was at the island of Abu, located just above the first cataract of the Nile at the Aswan. He and the other gods came from Sumer. His symbol was the serpent. The name Ptah has no meaning in Egyptian, but in Semitic it means he who fashioned things by carving and opening up. After 9,000 years, Ra, a son of Ptah, became the ruler. In the interim of Ptah's reign, there was a need for a whole lot more diking. For roughly 1,000 years after the Great Flood, or Deluge, which may have occurred circa 10,500 BCE, Ptah was implementing land reclamation. Circa 9,420 BCE, Ra, the complete, the pure one, began a reign of roughly 1,000 years. Ra is reputed to have also come to Earth from the, quote, planet of millions of years, end quote, in a celestial barge which was later kept at Anu, also known as Heliopolis. And as a side note, Ra/Marduk's home was Nibiru, where a year was equivalent to 3,600 Earth years and would indeed seem to be a planet of millions of years. Also, the celestial barge is likely a spaceship of some kind based on its description. Ra gave birth to a son named Shu, meaning dryness, and a daughter named Tefnut, meaning moisture. The two set the example for mortal pharaohs in later times. For example, the brother married his half-sister. Shu and Tefnut promptly began rule as king and queen circa 8420 BCE and reigned for some 700 years. Circa 7720 BCE, Geb, meaning who piles up the earth, along with his sister Nut, meaning the stretched out firmament, began a 500-year stint as king and queen of Egypt. Geb and Nut were so named based on activities related to the periodic appearance of the Bennu bird, from which the Greeks obtained the legend of the phoenix. The Bennu was an eagle with feathers of red and gold, and which died and reappeared at intervals lasting several millennia. It was for that bird, whose name was the same as that of the contraption in which Ra landed on Earth, that Geb engaged in great earthworks and Nut stretched out the firmament of the sky. These feats were carried out by the gods in the land of the lions. The Bennu bird might have been a celestial barge, and its periodic appearance might have been related to the Nibiru cycle. For example, every time Nibiru approaches perihelion, the Bennu bird, or the phoenix, again rises. Geb and Nut turned over the direct rule of Egypt to their 4 children: Asar, meaning the all-seeing, whom the Greeks called Osiris, his sister wife Ast, also known as Isis, Seth, and his wife Nephthys, also known as Nhat, meaning lady of the house. With 2 brothers married to their own 2 sisters, the gods confronted a serious problem of succession. The only plausible solution was to divide the kingdom. Osiris was given the northern lowlands, which was Lower Egypt, and Seth was given the southern, mountainous region, which was Upper Egypt. Seth, however, was not satisfied with the division of sovereignty and resorted to various schemes to gain control over the whole of Egypt. Scholars have assumed that the sole motive of Seth was a craving for power. But once one grasps what the gods' rules of succession were, it becomes possible to understand the profound effect these rules had upon the affairs of the gods, and then of human kings. Since the gods, and then men, could have, in addition to the official spouse, 1 or more concubines, as well as beget children through illicit love affairs, the first rule of succession was this: the son firstborn to the official spouse was the heir to the throne. If the official spouse bore no son, the son firstborn to any of the concubines became the heir. However, if at any time, even after the birth of the firstborn heir, a son was born to the ruler by his own half-sister, the son superseded the firstborn and became the legal heir. It was this custom that was the cause of much rivalry and strife among the gods of heaven and earth, and, we suggest, explains the basic motivation of Seth. Our source for this suggestion is Plutarch, a historian biographer of the 1st century AD who wrote down for the Greeks and Romans of his time the legendary histories of the Near Eastern gods. The Egyptian sources on which he relied were believed at the time to have been writings of the god Thoth himself, who, as the scribe of the gods, recorded for all times their histories and deeds upon this earth. In Thoth's version, Nut mothered 3 sons: Osiris, the firstborn, a son with an unknown name, and Seth, the youngest son. Nut also gave birth to Isis and Nephthys, but only Seth and Nephthys were fathered by Geb. Osiris and his second brother were fathered by Ra, who came to his granddaughter Nut in stealth. Meanwhile, Isis was fathered by Thoth. the Greek Hermes. Therefore, the firstborn was Osiris, who, having been fathered by the great Ra himself, had a significant claim to succession. The legitimate heir, however, was Seth, because of his having been born to the ruling Geb by his half-sister Nut. This is why Egypt was split into two kingdoms, and each brother given a limited sovereignty. But this also led in turn to a highly charged competition between the two brothers to assure that their son would be the next legitimate successor of the whole of Egypt. To achieve this goal, Seth would have to father a son by his half-sister Isis, whereas Osiris could achieve his aim by fathering a son by either Isis or Nephthys, both being half-sisters to him. The key was that Seth, or Osiris, would have the greater claim for their son to be the next king of a united Egypt only if he fathered a son by his half-sister. However, Seth and Nephthys had identical parents, and thus this union would afford no advantage to Seth. Osiris, on the other hand, could utilize either Isis and or Nephthys to stake his claim. Osiris then proceeded to deliberately block Seth's chances to have his descendants rule over Egypt by Osiris taking Isis as his spouse. Seth then married Nephthys, but as she was his full sister, none of their offspring could qualify. In this manner, the stage was set for Seth's increasingly violent rage against Osiris, who had deprived him both of the throne and of the succession of his son. The occasion for Seth's revenge, according to Plutarch, was the visit to Egypt of a certain queen of Ethiopia named Aso. In conspiracy with his supporters, Seth held a banquet in her honor, to which all the gods were invited. For his scheme, Seth had a magnificent chest constructed large enough to hold Osiris. This chest he brought into the banqueting room where, after it had been much admired by all who were present, Seth, as though in jest, promised to give it to any one of them whose body it would fit. Upon this, the whole company, one after the other, went into the chest. Last of all, Osiris lay himself down in it, upon which the conspirators immediately ran together, clapped the cover upon it, and then fastened it down on the outside with nails, pouring likewise melted lead over it. They then carried the chest in which Osiris was imprisoned to the seashore, and where the Nile flows into the Mediterranean at Tanis, sank the chest in the sea. However, Seth had not accounted for Isis, who promptly went searching for Osiris. She found the chest near Lebanon, but before she could figure out how to resurrect Osiris, Seth found out that she had the chest, seized it, and cut up the body of Osiris into 14 pieces, which he scattered all over Egypt. Isis eventually found all of Osiris's parts except for his phallus. However, Isis managed to extract from the body of Osiris its essence, and thereafter self-inseminated herself with his seed. This led to her conceiving and eventually giving birth to Horus. For what were apparently obvious reasons, she hid him in the Nile Delta, far from the eye of Seth. And as a side note, it's important to understand many scholars believe that in this chronology of Osiris and Isis, we find the analogs of the Immaculate Conception and messianic nature of Jesus that would later underpin the Christian religion. Meanwhile, with Osiris having apparently died without an heir, Seth promptly initiated the next step in his master plan and kidnapped Isis. This portion of the plan was to allow Seth to father a legitimate heir via his mating with Isis. Seth held her until she consented. It was starting to look good for Seth when Thoth turned up to help Isis escape, which she did. The only problem, however, was that when she returned to the swamps where Horus was hidden, she found him dying from a scorpion's sting. But then she got some real help. Quote, "Then Isis sent forth a cry to heaven and addressed her appeal to the boat of millions of years, and the celestial disk stood still and moved not from the place where it was. And Thoth came down, and he was provided with magical powers, and possessed the great power which made the word become deed. And he said, O Isis, thou goddess, thy glorious one, who had knowledge of the mouth, behold, no evil shall come upon the child Horus, for his protection cometh from the boat of Ra. I have come this day in the boat of the celestial disk from the place where it was yesterday. When the night cometh, this light shall drive away the poison for the healing of Horus. I have come from the skies to save the child for his mother. Horus was thus revived, and some say immunized forever. Educated and trained in martial arts by goddesses and gods who sided with Osiris, Horus was groomed as a divine prince, worthy of celestial association, and eventually appeared before the council of gods to claim the throne of Osiris. Seth still had a plan, and using trickery he attempted to plant his own seed in Horus, and thereby claimed that Horus could only succeed Seth, not precede him. Horus, however, had managed to catch the seed in his hand, and thus nullified Seth's claim. Meanwhile, Isis had taken Horus's seed into a cup and then sprinkled it on Seth's salad, such that after a healthy meal, Horus's seed was now in Seth. Thoth then checked that the semen Horus had caught in his hand was that of Seth, and at the same time that Seth indeed carried Horus's seed. Thus, Seth could only succeed Horus, not precede him. Seth, of course, was not about to admit defeat and went to war to settle his differences. According to the Edfu Temple inscription, the first face-to-face battle between Horus and Seth took place at the Lake of the Gods, thereafter known as the Lake of Battle. Horus managed to hit Seth with his divine lance. When Seth fell down, Horus captured him and brought him before Ra. His spear was in his neck, and the legs of the evil one were chained, and his mouth had been closed by a blow from the club of the god Horus. Ra decided that Isis and Horus could do with Seth and the other captured conspirators as they pleased. But as Horus began to slay the captives by cutting off their heads, Isis had pity on her brother Seth and set him free. There are several versions of what ensued, including one known as the Fourth Sallier Papyrus, and according to most, the release of Seth so infuriated Horus that he beheaded his own mother Isis. But the god Thoth put her severed head back into place and resurrected her. This incident is also reported by Plutarch. After his escape, Seth at first hid in a subterranean tunnel. After a lull of 6 days, a series of aerial battles ensued. Horus took to the air in a nar, meaning fiery pillar, which was depicted as an elongated cylindrical vessel equipped with fins or short wings. Its bulkhead contained 2 eyes, which kept changing color from blue to red and back to blue. From the rear, jet-like trails were shown from the front. The contraption spewed out rays. The text described a battle that ranged far and wide, and the first to be hit was Horus. Struck by a bolt of light from Seth's vehicle, the Nar lost one of its eyes, and Horus continued the fight from the winged disk of Ra. From out of this, he shot a harpoon at Seth. Now Seth was hit and lost his testicles. The great gods called a truce and once again summoned the adversaries before the council of the gods. We glean details of the deliberations from a text inscribed on a stone column by the pharaoh Shabako, circa 8th century BCE, who stated that the text is a copy made from a very old leather scroll, devoured by worms, which was found buried in the great temple of Ptah at Memphis. The council at first redivided Egypt between Horus and Seth along the lines of the division at the time of Osiris, but Geb had second thoughts and upset the decision, for he was concerned with the question of continuity. Who would open the body to successive generations? Seth, having lost his testicles, could no longer have offspring, and so Geb, Lord Earth, gave as a heritage to Horus the whole of Egypt. To Seth, a dominion away from Egypt was to be given. Henceforth, he was deemed by the Egyptians to have become an Asiatic deity. The Council of Gods adopted the recommendations unanimously. Its final action is thus described in the Papyrus of Hunefer. Horus is triumphant in the presence of the whole company of the gods. The sovereignty over the world hath been given unto him, and his dominion is in the uttermost parts of earth. The throne of the god Geb hath been adjudged unto him, along with the rank which hath been founded by the god Su. This legitimization, the papyrus went on to say, hath been formalized by decrees lodged in the chamber of records. It hath been inscribed upon a metal tablet according to the commandments of thy father Ptah. Gods celestial and gods terrestrial transfer themselves to the services of thy son Horns. They follow him to the hall of decrees. He shall lord over them. Osiris had begun his reign of Lower Egypt circa 7220 BCE and continued for some 450 years. Seth, who by the way was never shown without his animal disguise, had begun his reign of Upper Egypt circa 6870 BCE and lasted for some 350 years. The meaning of Seth's name, incidentally, still defies Egyptologists, despite the name being identical to Adam and Eve's third son. It should also be noted that the seven gods from Ptah to Ra to Horus reigned a total of 12,300 years. Horus took over the reins of kingship circa 6420 BCE and held sway for about 300 years. He was followed by 12 divine rulers or gods, including Thoth and Mot, who ruled for a total of 1,570 years. They were followed in turn by 38 demigods who ruled for some 3,650 years, beginning circa 4,550 BCE. The Turin Papyrus from the time of Ramses II lists Ra, Geb, Osiris, Seth, and Horus as the kings of Egypt, and later Thoth and Mot and others. The papyrus also lists the 38 semi-divine rulers split between 19 chiefs of the White Hall and 19 venerables of the north. Between the semi-divine rulers and Menes, beginning circa 2900 BCE, human kings ruled under the patronage of Horus, their epitaph being Shamsu-Hor. For some 350 years, these human kings ruled over what was apparently a chaotic time period. Names of those who wore only the red cap of Lower Egypt include Scorpion, Ka, Caesar, Narmer, and Sma. This dynasty is considered by some scholars as Dynasty 0. Circa 2550 BCE, the human ruler, Menes, reunited Upper and Lower Egypt and established his capital at Memphis. He was followed by 8 or 9 other kings, all of whom collectively formed the first dynasty of the Old Kingdom of Egypt. Other scholars place Menes as beginning his reign circa 3130 BCE. However, when one accounts for the 580 ghost years proposed by Immanuel Velikovsky in his Ages in Chaos thesis, the more likely date is 2550 BCE. There are many different types of viewer groups on YouTube. The archive primarily serves the viewer group that is interested in alternative explanations of human origin and evolution on planet Earth, and how extraterrestrials potentially played a role. In that endeavor, the archive will occasionally present a video that overlaps into other viewer groups. In the case of this presentation, the overlap will occur with the viewer group focused primarily on conspiracies. As such, the archive hastens to point out that the following presentation is a true conspiracy to withhold factual information about the planet Mars, and while NASA is implicated, is not necessarily the focus. Our focus is the specific information withheld and its relationship and importance to the ancient astronaut hypothesis. In the mid-1970s, NASA recorded an anomaly in a region of Mars known as Cydonia. Needless to say, it has garnered widespread scientific and popular culture interest in the subsequent decades. The area called Cydonia is in the northern hemisphere of Mars, in between the heavily cratered regions of the south and the smooth plains to the north. The area includes the regions of flat-topped mesa-like features, a region of small hills or knobs, and a complex of intersecting valleys. Cydonia was first photographed by the Viking 1 and 2 orbiters in 1976. Between the two, 18 images were taken of the region. Of these, 5 were considered suitable for studying surface features. In one of the images taken by Viking 1 on July 25, 1976, a 1.2-mile-long Cydonian mesa situated at 40.75 degrees north latitude and 9.46 degrees west longitude had the appearance of a humanoid face. When the image was originally acquired, Viking chief scientist Jerry Soffen dismissed the face on Mars in image 035A72 as a trick of light and shadow. And it was from that point the cover-up began. A second image, 070A13, also shows the face and was acquired 35 Viking orbits later at a different sun angle from the 035A72 image. This latter discovery was made independently by Vincent DePietro and Gregory Molnar, 2 computer engineers at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. DePietro and Molnar discovered the 2 misfiled images, Viking frames 053A72 and 070A13, while searching through NASA archives. Okay, let's fast forward a couple of decades. As a result of what initially slipped through the first exploration photos, it was imperative that NASA take a closer look at these coordinates. Keep in mind that in 1976 the face images were not on the internet, but by 1998 they were. The Mars Global Surveyor spacecraft was used in 1998 to re-image the face at Cydonia. This image is the high-pass filtered face image released by JPL to the world media in 1998. Enter Thomas C. Van Flandern. He was an American astronomer and author specializing in celestial mechanics. Van Flandern had a career as a professional scientist, but was noted as an outspoken proponent of non-mainstream views related to astronomy, physics, and extraterrestrial life. In his book, Dark Matter, Missing Planets, New Comets, Van Flandern described how he had become increasingly dissatisfied with the mainstream view of science by the early 1980s. He wrote, "Events in my life caused me to start questioning my goals and the correctness of everything I had learned. In matters of religion, medicine, biology, physics, and other fields, I came to discover that reality differed seriously from what I had been taught." In his book, on blogs, lectures, newsletter, and website, Van Flandern focused on problems with cosmology and physics theories. He alleged that when experimental evidence is incompatible with mainstream scientific theories, that mainstream scientists refuse to acknowledge this to avoid jeopardizing their funding. Knowing a bit about Van Flandern is relevant because he had his own analysis about the re-image of Cydonia in 1998. And he is one of the few in mainstream that possessed true objectivity. The following passages are his explanation of a literal cover-up. Quote, "Unfortunately for the objectivity that scientists are supposed to maintain, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory apparently was unhappy that the high-resolution image received by its spacecraft did not immediately settle the artificiality controversy. When the first picture arrived at JPL, its Mission Image Processing Laboratory passed the image through 2 filters, a low-pass filter and a high-pass filter. It is difficult to see how usage of these filters on this image before release to the media could be scientifically justified. Indeed, usage of the high-pass filter gave an especially damaging impression. From Adobe's Photoshop software, we find the following description of the function and purpose of this filter. High-pass filter retains edge details and suppresses the rest of the image. The filter removes low-frequency detail in an image. The filter is useful for extracting line art and large black and white areas from scanned images. The usage of these filters on the face image is documented on the JPL website at this address. The same day that the raw spacecraft image data was received at MSSS and posted to the internet, the JPL Public Information Office released the MIPL-created filter image to the world media. Now, whatever your opinion about the artificiality of the face may be, and whatever the actual merits of the issue may be, it seems beyond dispute that allowing world opinion to be based on the image was scientifically inappropriate. When considering why this happened, we appear to be left with an unhappy choice between dishonesty and incompetence. Dr. Flandern then asked this question: so what would the face mesa have looked like if the image had been taken under better lighting conditions from an overhead perspective? Here is the answer. On the left, you see a negative of the face as seen by the MGS spacecraft in April 1998. In the center, you see the lighting source switched from the southeast to the northwest. And on the right, the viewing angle switched from 45 degrees west to overhead. Dr. Flandern presents his entire scientific argument for artificiality on his website at this address. Here is the conclusion of his argument. As this applies to the face, all Viking images were a posteriori, so no reliable conclusions could be drawn from the data initially available. However, the images did allow formulation of specific hypotheses for further testing. The competing models were, number one, the face is an artificial structure built by an intelligent species, indigenous or visiting, and intended to depict the face of a member of a humanoid-like species, whether their own, ours, or some other. Number two, the face is of natural origin, resembling a humanoid face entirely by accidental chance, combined with our predilection to see familiar patterns in otherwise non-ordered data. With regard to some of the new data provided by the MGS images taken in 1998 or later, with 10 times greater resolution than the older 1976 Viking images, these competing hypotheses and their consequent predictions have a priori status. Scientific method attaches significance to the test results of predictions having a priori status. Disputing or ignoring the results of test of a priori predictions, whichever way they go, is itself a form of a posteriori reasoning, generally of questionable validity because it violates the controls against bias imposed by the scientific method. The artificiality hypothesis predicts that an image intended to portray a humanoid face should have more than the primary facial features, eyes, nose, mouth, seen in the Viking images. At higher resolution, we ought to see secondary facial features such as eyebrows, pupils, nostrils, and lips, for which the resolution of the original Viking images was insufficient. The presence of such features in the MGS images would be significant new indicators of artificiality. Their existence by chance is highly improbable, and the prediction of their existence by the artificiality hypothesis is completely a priori. By contrast, the natural origin hypothesis predicts that the face will look more fractal, for example more natural, at higher resolution. Any feature that resembled secondary facial features could do so only by chance and would be expected to have poor correspondence with the expected size, shape, location, and orientation of real secondary facial features. Any such chance feature might also be expected to be part of a background containing many similar chance features. It is possible to see details in the image, once the right correspondence to the Viking image is recognized, that might have been intended to portray each secondary facial feature: eyebrow, pupil, nostrils, and lips. These are more plainly visible in higher magnification views with brightness and contrast adjusted for each area because of the limited contrast in the image. Such views may be inspected at this website in the Sidonia section. Detailed study with image processing software shows that these secondary facial features exist where expected by the artificiality hypothesis, but nowhere else on the mesa. This rules out a background of many similar features from which we might pick out just ones that fulfill our expectations. Moreover, each feature is present at the expected location, having the expected size, shape, and orientation. The odds are against any of these features arising by chance. Each of these probabilities has been carefully and conservatively estimated in a fuller treatment of this topic. The combined odds against all of these features being present and having all expected characteristics to the degree actually present, when taken together with the absence of similar features in the background, exceed 1,000 billion to 1. Now, did you get that last number? That's this number, chance of it occurring naturally. The archive is convinced more by Van Flanderen's argument over NASA's and considers this one of the rare provable conspiracies related to the agency. But if it is in fact a face, whose face is it? For the answer to that, let's look at the Sumerian tablets and how Zecharia Sitchin explains it. After a colorful history on Nibiru and Earth, the Anunnaki ruler Alelu was ultimately exiled to Mars, also known as Lamu. Quote, "For 9 shars was Alelu king on Nibiru. For 8 shars Eridu he commanded. In the 9th shar to die in exile on Lamu was his fate." On Nibiru a new celestial chariot for soaring off was prepared. New kinds of rocket ships, sky ships, and that which Enki had designed it was transporting. A fresh group of 50 from Nibiru it was taking. Chosen females among them were: by Ninmah, exalted lady, were they commanded. In succor and healing were they trained. Ninmah, exalted lady, a daughter of Anu she was, a half-sister, not a full sister, of Enki and Enlil she was. In succor and in healing she was greatly learned. In the treating of ailments she excelled. To the complaints from earth she gave much attention. A healing was she preparing. The course of prior chariots on tablets of destinies recorded, Nungal its pilot did follow. Unharmed it reached the celestial god Lamu. It circled the planet, slowly to its surface it descended. A faint beaming, a group of heroes followed. Ninmah was going with them. Beside a lakeshore, Anzu they found. From his helmet the signals were beaming. Anzu himself was without motion, prostrate. He lay dead. Ninmah touched his face. To his heart she gave attention. From her pouch she took out the pulsar. Upon Anzu's heart pulsing she directed. From her pouch she took out the emitter. Its crystals, life-giving emissions on his body she directed. 60 times did Ninmah direct the pulsar. 60 times the emitter she directed. On the 60th time, Anzu his eyes opened. With his lips he motioned. Gently upon his face Ninmah water of life poured. His lips with it wetting. Gentle into his mouth the food of life she placed. Then the miracle did happen. Anzu from the dead arose. About Alelu they him then inquired. Of Alelu's death Anzu them told. He led them to a great rock, from the plain heavenward protruding. There to them what had happened he was telling. Alelu, soon after the landing, from unremitting pain to scream began. From his mouth his innards he was spitting. In agony he peered over the wall. Thus was Anzu to them saying. He led them to a great rock, like a mountain from the plain heavenward rising. In the great rock a cave I found, Alelu's corpse therein I hid. Its entrance with stones I covered. So was Anzu to them saying. They followed him to the rock, the stones they removed, the cave they entered. Inside, what of Alelu remained they found. He who once on Nibiru a king was, a pile of bones, was in a cave now lying. For the first time in our annals a king not on Nibiru has died. Not on Nibiru was he buried, so did Nimma say. Let him in peace for eternity rest, she was saying. They, the cave's entrance again with stones covered. The image of Alelu upon the great rock mountain with beams they carved. They showed him wearing an eagle's helmet. His face they made uncovered. Let the image of Alelu forever gaze toward Nibiru that he ruled, toward the earth whose gold he discovered. So Nimma, exalted lady, in the name of her father Anu did declare. As for you, Anzu, to you, Anu, the king his promise shall be keeping. 20 heroes with you here shall remain, the way stations building to begin. Rocket ships from earth the golden ores shall here deliver. Celestial chariots from here the gold to Nibiru shall then transport. Hundreds of heroes their abode on Lamu shall make. You, Anzu, shall be their commander. Thus did the great lady in the name of her father Anu to Anzu say. My life I owe to you, great lady, so was Anzu saying. My gratitude to Anu shall limits not have.